What if I told you that one of the greatest heroes in the Bible wasn't a warrior or a king, but a woman with a troubled past, living in a city doomed to destruction? Rahab, a harlot in the ancient city of Jericho, made a decision that not only saved her life, but also changed the course of history. While the rest of Jericho placed their faith in its mighty walls, Rahab put her trust in a God she barely knew. Her story isn't just about survival. It's about redemption, faith, and the power of one courageous choice. If you've ever felt like your past holds you back, Rahab's story will show you that faith can rewrite your future in ways you never imagined. Rahab lived in the ancient city of Jericho, a city known for its strong walls and strategic location. Jericho was a hub of trade and culture, and it held a significant place in the ancient world. Rahab herself was a harlot, a profession often looked down upon, yet she held a unique position within the city's society. Her home, built into the city wall, was frequented by travelers, making her well-informed about the affairs of the world outside. This background set the stage for her pivotal role in history. Despite her profession, Rahab's story reveals that she was much more than what society labeled her. Her sharp mind and keen understanding of what was happening in Jericho made her a key player in the events that unfolded. Living in such a prominent city, she would have heard about the Israelites and their God, rumors that likely sparked her curiosity and shaped her future decisions. Rahab's environment, while harsh, gave her insight into the changing tides, something most of Jericho's citizens ignored. Her home was not just a place of business. It was also a gateway to the city, a location that provided her with access to important people and information. This made her uniquely positioned to encounter the Israelite spies when they arrived in Jericho. The city, under tension due to the approaching Israelites, was already on edge, and Rahab, aware of the situation, likely weighed her options carefully. Her decision to engage with these spies would alter her life forever. Rahab's origins as a harlot didn't define her destiny. Instead, her story is a testament to the fact that even those considered outsiders or sinners can play a vital role in God's plan. In a city as corrupt and morally decayed as Jericho, Rahab stood out for her ability to see beyond the immediate circumstances. She understood the significance of the moment, something her fellow citizens overlooked, which marked the beginning of her journey from harlot to heroine. Rahab's position on the city wall symbolized her place between two worlds: the world of Jericho, with its idolatry and corruption, and the world of the Israelites, representing a new beginning and faith in the one true God. This physical and symbolic positioning foreshadows the pivotal decision she would soon make. The walls of Jericho, once a source of protection, would crumble, but Rahab's faith would remain unshaken. From the very beginning, Rahab's life was filled with contradictions, living in a society that despised her profession, yet being the one who would ultimately bring salvation to her family. Her origins, far from being a limitation, were the foundation for a greater purpose. And this is where her journey truly begins, leading to an encounter that would change not only her fate but the fate of an entire city. Jericho was no ordinary city, it was a fortress. Its massive walls were a symbol of strength and security, making it seem impenetrable to outside forces. But in God's plan, even the most fortified cities could fall. Jericho stood as a barrier between the Israelites and the Promised Land, a land they had been wandering toward for 40 years. To fully step into the future God had for them, the Israelites needed to overcome this great obstacle. Jericho wasn't just another city to conquer, it was a test of faith. For the people of Jericho, the city's walls represented safety, and they trusted in their fortifications more than anything else. However, in the spiritual realm, these walls were about to meet a force greater than stone and mortar. The fall of Jericho wasn't just about military strategy. It was a divine act meant to demonstrate God's power and his commitment to his promises. The destruction of this city would be a clear sign to the world that nothing can stand in the way of God's plan. Jericho's role in the larger story of Israel's conquest is significant because it was the first major city that the Israelites faced upon entering Canaan. The city's position at the crossroads of trade routes made it a valuable stronghold, but more importantly, it represented the first step in the fulfillment of God's covenant with Abraham. By bringing down Jericho, God was showing that his promise to give the land to the descendants of Abraham would come to pass, no matter how impossible it seemed. Interestingly, while Jericho was a place of idolatry and pagan worship, God's plan included redemption even within this city. Rahab's story is a direct reflection of how God can bring salvation from the least expected places. Jericho's fall was inevitable, but within its destruction, a thread of grace was woven through Rahab and her family. This highlights that God's plan for judgment and salvation often runs side by side, showing mercy even when judgment is deserved. The collapse of Jericho also sent a message to the surrounding nations. News of Israel's victory would spread quickly, instilling fear in their enemies and strengthening the faith of the Israelites. Jericho's downfall was a pivotal moment, one that shaped the future of Israel's conquest of Canaan. The city's significance wasn't just in its physical might, but in the spiritual battle that was unfolding. God used the destruction of Jericho as a way to affirm his presence among his people. In God's grand design, Jericho had to fall, but its fall was more than just the end of a city. It marked the beginning of a new era for the Israelites. It wasn't the strength of Israel's army that brought down Jericho, but their obedience to God's instructions. The destruction of the city would pave the way for the Israelites to take possession of the land, fulfilling a promise that had been made generations before. But before the walls could crumble, a courageous act of faith was about to take place inside the city. The story of Rahab takes a significant turn when two Israelite spies enter Jericho. Sent by Joshua to assess the city's defenses, the spies knew they were entering enemy territory, but they were guided by faith in God's plan. Rahab's home, located on the outer wall of the city, became the perfect place for them to hide. The moment they stepped into her house, a divine connection was formed. Rahab, though a harlot, instantly recognized something different about these men and chose to protect them. As news of the spies' presence spread, the king of Jericho sent men to search Rahab's home. It was a tense moment. Rahab's decision to hide the spies was not only dangerous but also an act of treason against her people. However, her understanding of the God of Israel had already begun to shape her choices. Instead of betraying the men, she hid them on her roof beneath stalks of flax. Her quick thinking saved their lives and set in motion a plan that would alter the course of history. Rahab's encounter with the spies was more than just a meeting. It was a pivotal moment of faith. She could have easily handed them over to the king's soldiers, securing her own safety. Yet, Rahab had heard of the mighty works of the God of Israel, the parting of the Red Sea and the defeat of powerful kings. She believed in the power of this God and knew that Jericho's fate was sealed. This understanding gave her the courage to defy her king and protect the spies, placing her faith in something greater than herself. The conversation between Rahab and the spies is one of trust and mutual respect. Rahab didn't demand anything up front, but instead asked for kindness in return for her protection. She understood the risks involved, but also saw an opportunity to save not just herself, but her entire family. The spies, in turn, recognized her faith and promised to protect her and her loved ones when the city fell. This pact would be honored, but only because Rahab's faith led her to act in the face of danger. Rahab's choice to hide the spies wasn't just a random act of kindness. It was an act of spiritual discernment. She understood that the God of Israel was with these men, and that opposing them would be futile. Her decision marked a turning point, not just for her life, but for the entire nation of Israel. Rahab's house, once a place of sin, became a sanctuary for God's people, showing how redemption can come from the most unlikely places. In choosing to protect the spies, Rahab chose faith over fear. This encounter with the spies marked the beginning of Rahab's transformation. From a harlot in a doomed city, she became a woman whose faith would be remembered for generations. Her actions paved the way for the Israelites' victory over Jericho, but more importantly, it showed that faith in God could transcend societal boundaries and personal history. As the spies left her home, the seeds of Jericho's fall had been sown, but the story of Rahab was just beginning. Rahab's faith was a driving force behind her actions, and it's what set her apart from the other citizens of Jericho. While the city was gripped with fear over the approaching Israelites, Rahab saw things differently. She had heard of their victories and the power of their God, And unlike the rest of Jericho, she didn't dismiss these stories as mere rumors. In fact, she recognized the truth in them. This faith, though still in its early stages, led Rahab to take bold steps that would change the trajectory of her life and her family's future. When Rahab chose to hide the spies, she wasn't just making a strategic decision. She was making a statement of belief. In a city filled with idolatry and paganism, she turned away from the gods of Jericho and put her trust in the God of Israel. This decision wasn't without risk. She knew that if the king's men discovered her actions, she would face severe punishment, perhaps even death. But Rahab's faith in the God of Israel was stronger than her fear of earthly consequences, and that's what gave her the courage to act. Her decision to protect the spies is a powerful example of faith in action. Rahab didn't have all the answers, nor did she know exactly how things would unfold, but she trusted that aligning herself with God's people was the right thing to do. This is the essence of faith, stepping into the unknown with confidence that God's plan is greater than anything we can see. Rahab's choice to hide the spies demonstrated her belief that the God of Israel was not only real but also merciful, even to someone like her. What's remarkable about Rahab's faith is that it wasn't based on personal experience with the God of Israel, but simply on what she had heard. She didn't need to witness miracles firsthand to believe. The stories of God's power were enough to convince her that He was worth trusting. Rahab's faith teaches us that we don't need to see everything to believe. Sometimes, hearing and trusting is enough. Her belief in the unseen led her to take risks that most people in Jericho would never have considered. Rahab's courage in the face of danger was a direct result of her faith. She had no guarantees that things would work out in her favor, yet she still acted, believing that God's will would prevail. Her story is a reminder that faith often requires us to take bold steps, even when the outcome is uncertain. Rahab didn't wait for perfect conditions to act. She moved forward with the confidence that God's plan would be fulfilled, even if she couldn't see the full picture. Rahab's decision to protect the spies was just the beginning of her faith journey. Her bold actions would soon lead to her being spared from the destruction of Jericho. But more than that, it would bring her into the fold of God's people. Her faith wasn't just about survival, it was about transformation. Rahab's courage, fueled by her belief in God, positioned her for a future she couldn't have imagined. And while her story was still unfolding, her faith had already secured her place in history. The agreement between Rahab and the Israelite spies was a pivotal moment in the story, sealing the fate of Rahab and her family. Rahab had taken a tremendous risk by hiding the spies, and in return, she asked for protection when Jericho would inevitably fall. The pact was simple. Rahab would continue to keep their presence a secret, and when the Israelites returned to conquer the city, she and her family would be spared. This agreement wasn't just a deal. It was a reflection of Rahab's trust in the God of Israel and the integrity of His people. In exchange for Rahab's protection, the spies gave her specific instructions. She was to tie a scarlet cord in the window of her home, which was built into the city wall. This scarlet cord would serve as a signal to the invading Israelite army that those inside her house were under divine protection. The symbolism of the scarlet cord is powerful. It represented Rahab's faith and the bloodline that would eventually lead to Christ. By following this instruction, Rahab demonstrated her willingness to follow God's direction, even in the midst of danger. The pact also involved a clear condition. Rahab's entire family had to remain inside her house during the attack. If anyone stepped outside, they would be responsible for their own fate. This detail shows the importance of obedience and trust in the plan that was unfolding. Rahab didn't try to negotiate further or seek better terms. She simply agreed, understanding that this was her opportunity to be saved. Her faith in the God of Israel was growing stronger, and her willingness to follow through on the pact was evidence of that faith. What's interesting about this pact is that it wasn't just about Rahab, it extended to her entire family. Rahab's actions saved not only herself but also her loved ones. Her faith and courage had a ripple effect, providing protection for those closest to her. This shows that faith often requires us to act not just for ourselves but for others. Rahab's decision to protect the spies opened the door for her family's salvation, a powerful example of how one person's faith can impact an entire community. The spies, for their part, honored their word. They trusted Rahab and believed that she would keep her side of the agreement. This trust was mutual, rooted in the shared understanding that God's plan was at work. Both Rahab and the spies were acting out of faith. Rahab in the God she barely knew, and the spies in a woman who, by all outward appearances, seemed like an unlikely ally. Yet, this unlikely alliance was exactly what God used to bring about his purpose. The pact between Rahab and the spies was more than just a survival strategy. It was a testament to the power of faith and trust in God's promises. Rahab's home, once a place associated with shame, became a place of refuge and salvation. Her agreement with the spies was a turning point, showing that even in the midst of chaos and destruction, God's grace can be found. With the scarlet cord in her window, Rahab's faith was now visible to the world, and her role in the story of Jericho was sealed. The fall of Jericho was one of the most dramatic moments in the history of Israel's conquest. The Israelites, under Joshua's leadership, followed God's unconventional battle plan, which involved marching around the city for 7 days. On the seventh day, they circled the city 7 times, and after a loud shout, the walls of Jericho came crashing down. While the destruction of Jericho was inevitable, Rahab's home, marked by the scarlet cord, stood as a beacon of salvation amidst the chaos. As the walls collapsed and the city fell into ruins, Rahab and her family were spared just as the spies had promised. The Israelite soldiers, seeing the scarlet cord in her window, knew that this house was under divine protection. In a city filled with destruction and death, Rahab's household became a sanctuary. Her faith in God had not only saved her life but also the lives of those she loved. This moment of rescue was the culmination of Rahab's courageous decisions and unwavering belief in the God of Israel. The fall of Jericho was not only a military victory for the Israelites but also a spiritual victory for Rahab. Her salvation was a direct result of her faith in action. In a city doomed to destruction, she chose to align herself with God's people, trusting in his power to save. The fact that her home was built into the city wall, which collapsed everywhere else, is a striking symbol of how God's protection extends to those who put their faith in him. Rahab's salvation in the midst of Jericho's fall was a clear demonstration of God's mercy and grace. Rahab's rescue is a reminder that God's promises are trustworthy. The spies had made a pact with her, and despite the overwhelming destruction surrounding them, they kept their word. Rahab's story is not just about physical survival. It's about the transformative power of faith. She went from being a harlot in a condemned city to a woman chosen by God for a greater purpose. This transformation highlights how faith can lead to redemption, even in the most unlikely of circumstances. The destruction of Jericho also carried a message to the Israelites and to the surrounding nations. God's power was unmatched, and his plans would always prevail. However, within this display of divine judgment, Rahab's salvation stands as a reminder that God is merciful to those who believe in him. Rahab's faith set her apart from the rest of Jericho's inhabitants, and her deliverance was a testament to the fact that no one is beyond the reach of God's grace. Rahab's story didn't end with the fall of Jericho. Her salvation marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life. She and her family were welcomed into the Israelite community, and Rahab's faith continued to grow. She would later become part of the lineage of Jesus Christ, a legacy that started with her bold decision to trust in God's plan. The fall of Jericho was a turning point not just for the Israelites but for Rahab as well, a turning point that would echo throughout history. Rahab's story doesn't end with the fall of Jericho. In fact, her legacy only grows from that point forward. After being spared during the destruction of Jericho, Rahab was fully integrated into the Israelite community. But her significance goes far beyond just surviving the city's collapse. Rahab would become part of the very lineage that leads to Jesus Christ, securing her place in the history of salvation. This unlikely hero, once a harlot in a pagan city, became an ancestor of the Messiah. The inclusion of Rahab in the genealogy of Jesus, as mentioned in the Gospel of Matthew 1 verse 5, highlights God's ability to redeem anyone, regardless of their past. Rahab's faith not only saved her life but positioned her to play a vital role in God's redemptive plan. Her transformation from a woman living in a sinful city to a foremother of Christ underscores the theme of grace that runs throughout the Bible. Her legacy is one of hope, showing that God's purpose can work through even the most unexpected people. Rahab's impact is also felt in her example of faith. In the New Testament, she is praised for her belief in God's power and her courageous actions. In Hebrews 11 verse 31, Rahab is listed among the heroes of faith, celebrated for her role in hiding the Israelite spies and trusting in God's promises. This acknowledgement places her alongside figures like Abraham and Moses, further cementing her legacy as one of the great examples of faith in action. Rahab's story reminds us that faith, no matter how small or unlikely, can lead to incredible outcomes. Rahab's legacy also serves as a powerful reminder of the inclusivity of God's plan of salvation. Although she was a Gentile, Rahab was welcomed into the covenant community of Israel. This foreshadows the eventual inclusion of all nations into God's plan through the work of Jesus Christ. Rahab's story illustrates that salvation is not reserved for a select few, but is available to all who place their faith in God. Her life becomes a testament to the fact that God's grace knows no boundaries. Moreover, Rahab's story continues to inspire believers today. Her courage and faith resonate with those who feel unworthy or marginalized. She shows that no matter how far we may feel from God, there is always a path back through faith and obedience. Rahab's legacy teaches that God sees beyond our past and uses our faith to bring about His purposes. Her inclusion in the lineage of Jesus stands as proof that God can use anyone, regardless of their background, to accomplish His divine will. Rahab's legacy in the plan of salvation is undeniable. From the walls of Jericho to the birth of Christ, her story is woven into the fabric of redemption. She is a living example of how faith can transform lives and how God's grace can bring salvation to even the most unlikely individuals. As Rahab's story reaches its climax, we see that her faith was not just about her own salvation. It was about being part of something much greater. And while her immediate story comes to a close, her legacy continues to influence and inspire. Rahab's story, though ancient, holds timeless lessons that are just as relevant today as they were during the fall of Jericho. One of the most powerful lessons we can learn from Rahab is that our past does not define our future. She lived a life that society judged harshly, yet God saw her faith and used her for His greater purpose. In today's world, where many feel burdened by past mistakes or labels, Rahab's transformation shows that anyone can find redemption and purpose through faith. Another lesson from Rahab is the importance of courage. In a world filled with uncertainty, fear often holds people back from taking bold steps in life. Rahab, in the face of imminent danger, chose to act courageously by protecting the spies and trusting in God's plan. Her story teaches us that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to act in faith despite the fear. In our daily lives, we often face decisions that require us to step out in faith, even when the outcome is uncertain. Rahab's example reminds us that courage, coupled with faith, can lead to incredible results. Rahab's ability to see beyond her immediate circumstances offers another critical lesson. While the rest of Jericho placed their trust in the city's walls and military power, Rahab placed her trust in God. She understood that physical strength and resources could not stand against the will of God. Today, we often rely on our own abilities, wealth, or status to secure our future, but Rahab's story encourages us to put our faith in something greater. True security comes from aligning ourselves with God's plan, even when it seems counterintuitive. Her story also highlights the power of one person's faith to impact the lives of others. Rahab's faith didn't just save her, it saved her entire family. This serves as a reminder that our actions and faith can have a ripple effect on the people around us. In a world where individualism often dominates, Rahab's story calls us to consider how our faith can influence and uplift others, particularly those we care about most. Finally, Rahab's story teaches us about the inclusivity of God's grace. As a foreigner and a harlot, Rahab was the last person anyone would expect to be part of God's plan. Yet, she became a crucial figure in the lineage of Jesus Christ. Her inclusion in the history of salvation shows that no one is beyond the reach of God's love. In today's world, Where people are often judged by their backgrounds, Rahab's story is a reminder that faith, not status, is what matters most to God. Rahab's life continues to teach us profound lessons about faith, courage, redemption, and God's unending grace. Her story resonates in a world that is still grappling with questions of identity, purpose, and belonging. Rahab reminds us that no matter where we come from or what we've done, we can find a place in God's plan if we choose to trust in Him. And with that, Rahab's legacy continues to guide and inspire generations to come. Rahab's story reminds us that no matter where we come from or what we've done, God's grace can transform our lives if we trust in Him. Her faith led to her salvation, and that same faith can lead to life-changing decisions for us today. So, what steps are you willing to take in your own faith journey? Will you be like Rahab, courageous enough to trust in God's plan, even when the odds are against you? Take this moment to reflect on how God is calling you to act in faith, just as He called Rahab. If you want to keep learning about these powerful stories of faith, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a lesson. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank You for Rahab's story, a powerful reminder that no one is beyond Your grace. Help us to trust in You, even in the most difficult circumstances, and give us the courage to follow Your plan for our lives. Amen.